what are some different strategies that you can use, some useful information to be able to get your ideal version of your own body? Let's stick around and chat about it today on this episode. Let's hit it. How's it going, everyone? My name is Dr. Phoenix Singh. I want to warmly welcome you to this episode. Today we're going to be chatting a little bit about a subject that I'm deeply passionate about because of my own past and my own history. And this is one about dieting and exercise. So specifically how to be able to achieve the body that you have always wanted to achieve. Now, people obviously have very strong opinions when it comes to topics of diet and exercise, and I completely understand why. It's something that is so deeply personal and that so many of us have struggled with either in the past, in the present, or it's something that most of us at some point in the future are going to struggle with. Now, you may be somebody who's lucky like my grandmother who could eat like 3 cakes and lose weight somehow, right? But for most of us, that is not the case. Unfortunately, trust me, I love cake, so that would be fantastic, but unfortunately, it's just not the case. So what I would like to do today with you is to be able to share some information that assisted me in losing over 70 pounds now, reducing my body fat from over 40%. I was 44% body fat back in 2017 to now in 2020 being under 15% body fat, reducing my waist, if you can believe it, by 13 inches, which is like, it's just unbelievable to me, right? And significantly increasing my muscle mass at the same time. So it's, per usual, a blessing to have you guys here. Please do, if you enjoyed this video, like it, subscribe to our channel, and hit that bell so that you get notifications every time that we post new original content. Please do share it with your friends and with your congregation, and also feel free to follow us at these social media accounts below. So the first thing to be able to say before we kick off is to tell you a little bit about my history when it comes to weight loss and how I really made that final decision that this is the time that we really got to get on this thing. So I used to run a company, and it was a huge blessing, and got very lucky and was able to sell it back in 2017. And at the time that I sold it, my body looked completely different. I was so much bigger. I certainly had health problems like a lot of people who end up chronically stressed and these things with work. There's a whole new series on right now at the time of this filming called The United States of Stress. And sometimes that's how it feels. And it doesn't matter where we are in the world, everybody goes through seasons of their life where, due to their personal lives or due to their careers, they experience such a high level of stress that all of us have coping mechanisms. All of us. As much as all of us would like to say that, every time that we have a problem, we go straight to God, or every time that we have an issue, we're able to handle it like, mature adults. In actuality, it's such a challenge to be able to act maturely in some cases, and instead we resolve ourselves to using something else, right? In some cases it's alcohol or drugs. In some cases it's seeking out sex, or seeking out relationships and putting a lot of pressure on our partner to kind of fill that God-shaped handprint that's on our hearts. And in some cases, some of us use food. And food is very challenging to consider in this way because you can become clinically addicted to food. It is one of these things where if you take a look at the pharmacokinetics, as they call it, of food, what food does for you, the same neurotransmitters are at play here, right? So we're talking about dopamine, we're talking about serotonin, we're talking about the same things that, activate our brains if we're snorting cocaine or if we're, smoking a blunt of marijuana, right? The same things are at play here, right? And so we need to take that into consideration. Now, of course, if you go and, you're snorting cocaine, a lot of people in society would say like, oh, really not a good thing, shouldn't be doing that. And at least cocaine, at least in the US right now, is, unbelievably expensive, which is why you really see pockets of cocaine use, powdered cocaine use, relative to crack cocaine use, which is more potent and also more commonly used by individuals in lower socioeconomic strata. because it's something that is less expensive, right? But it's still very, very potent. And obviously, if I talk about crack, if I talk about powdered cocaine, people almost, will probably laugh seeing me make this video and say, first of all, this guy knows way too much about drugs, right? But this is because, my background in forensic psychology and working with substance abusers, I know a lot about it. But it's one of these things where, you see it destroy people's lives. And food, people don't think about, can absolutely do the same thing. And just like people who are addicted to cocaine oftentimes spend a lot of their time thinking about, where am I going to get my next hit? When do I get to be in that kind of state of ecstasy again? It can be very similar for individuals who are addicted, especially to these refined carbohydrates like processed sugars. And of course, these things pervade society. And ironically, whereas something like powdered cocaine may be incredibly expensive and looked down at by society, and it's obviously not something where your body necessarily needs powdered cocaine. Your body does need food to be able to function. You do have to fuel yourself. And unhealthy food oftentimes is less healthy and more accessible than healthy food. Now, I think that there are so many wonderful videos on platforms like YouTube and different blogs, etc., which go into this deeper, and they talk about, food deserts, as people like, Michelle Obama, former First Lady, did a tremendous job bringing national attention to this here in the US, that in lower socioeconomic strata neighborhoods, usually they have these, she called them, food deserts, the idea that, there's just nowhere you can buy healthy food. It's, literally like a desert if that's what you're looking for. Instead, you're going to get all the fast foods, all the corner stores with processed foods and packaged foods, etc. So what happens is that it can be really, really tough to be able to be healthy. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but it's also true. And the food which is unhealthy is not only everywhere, right? But it's the same thing in terms of the media and commercials and these sorts of things. The concept of going out to eat, the idea of social pressure if you're not eating what other people are eating. You go to a place and, all of your buddies are, grabbing wings and they're grabbing nachos and these things, and you're having like a soup or a salad. You can really put a lot of pressure on yourself, thinking that everybody's, people won't accept me, whatever it is, which I know sounds crazy, but at the same time, I understand, I really do. So what happens when it comes to food in terms of it being a clinical addiction is that it's something that is not as readily recognized by society as a whole. People think just like something like major depression, just deal with it, come on, man up. Right? Man up and just deal with it. Just go to the gym. It's easy. What's wrong with you, right? We don't see the psychological struggles and we don't see the physical dependence that we have on these processed refined sugars, which are toxic to our bodies. So what my goal is today for us is to be talking to you a little bit about the realizations and the small pieces of education that I learned, these pieces of information that totally changed the game for me and resulted in my being able to lose all of this weight. Now, am I at the end of my journey? Of course not. And this is something where I had to realize that, I, for the last 10 years, have been really a compulsive yo-yo dieter, right? I'm really good, super duper healthy for a couple of weeks, maybe even a couple of months at a time, and then I totally fall off the wagon. Life gets stressful, things happen in my personal life, whatever it is, and all of a sudden I'm using food to cope again. I had to wake up one day, and this was a few months ago after a really stressful year last year, and realize that in my life, I'm a 33-year-old man, right? As a 33-year-old grown man, that there is no good option for me. I have two choices. Choice number one is to think that, well, I should be able to kind of manage what I eat. I should be strong enough. I should be man enough to be able to do that, right? To be able to get a handle on my consumption to the point where I can have chips and queso every now and again. I can have that slice of cake. I can have these things. I know myself well enough in terms of patterns that when I do that, I fall off the wagon. I just do, and I can't help myself then from eating this very unhealthy for you food, right? So that's one option, is up and down like it's been for the last 10 years, forever, and believing essentially that there's something wrong with me if I can't, or I'm not mature enough, or I'm not man enough if I don't do that, which is total BS. It's just ridiculous, right? Or on the other hand, the other option is to essentially be a bit more restrictive and say, I can't have those things that taste, phenomenal to me, and they make me feel good even for a very brief period of time, and they make my insulin crash, though I feel sick, I get brain fog, I get fatigued, my sleep just goes down the drain, I end up, acting more aggressive for some reason. When I eat those kinds of foods, it's really bad. I have to get rid of them, right? But I don't enjoy it. I don't enjoy doing that. I don't enjoy putting pressure on myself and having almost too much structure in terms of what I eat and in terms of, exercising on the daily. Those are the options. Both options are not ones that I enjoy, that I like, or that I want to be true, but those are the options. And this was a really cold, hard realization for me. And so what I ended up doing was going with the latter of the two, right? And deciding that from now on, I'm going to be very consistent. I'm going to lose the weight that I put on, right? So right now about 177, right? And earlier in the year, or not earlier this year, because January 2020 when I'm making this video. But a couple of months ago, right, November, I got back from this trip and I had just been, eating and eating and eating on this trip, and I got up to the upper 190s. And I haven't been upper 190s in years, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Because no one is forcing you to do it. We're doing it to ourselves. And yes, there can be enablers in our life and these things when it comes to food, our social group, family members, whatever it is. However, at the end of the day, I had to take responsibility for my own actions. And it takes a good, cold, hard look in the mirror to realize this. And it is not pleasant, and it is not fun. And the idea that you have a long road ahead of you can be very scary. And if you watch other videos on this channel, you're going to know that I believe in 1% weekly changes. Not trying to go from all of this to all of that. Don't go from saying, I don't diet at all, to saying I'm going to have a 1,000 calorie caloric deficit a week. Or I'm going to go from not going to any gym sessions whatsoever to all of a sudden saying, I'm going to go to the gym 7 days a week, twice a day. It's just not going to happen. It's not sustainable. You're going to fall off the wagon. Building habits takes many weeks, right? And then you got to sustain those habits, right? It's incredibly important that you stick to them and be as consistent as you can. Really schedule your life. And I, of all people, understand that sometimes building a schedule, again, it can feel like you're setting boundaries around yourself that are keeping you, that are holding you in. But in actuality, what it's doing is providing you that structure so that within those boundaries, it's almost like having a plot of land. You can remember to water the grass, mow the lawn, take care of your home. These sorts of things that give you that sense of stability. And stability is something that all of us as human beings deeply yearn for. So, just remember the following phrase. You're not always going to be motivated, so you must learn to be disciplined. Okay, one more time. You won't always be motivated. I'm not always motivated for diet and exercise, so you have to learn to be disciplined. If that means writing discipline on your hand, write discipline on your hand, whatever it takes to be able to get you started down that path, okay? So now what I'd like to do is to be able to give you kind of a few pieces of guidance, and these are practical pieces and things that I've learned from the literature that have really kind of influenced me and have really helped me to be able to shed the pounds in a way that's very slow, very consistent, and something that I know can work for you as well if you work this system, okay? So number one has to do with how our body burns calories, okay? Our body burns calories in 4 primary ways. The first way that it burns calories is through intentional exercise. So this is everything you would think about. I'm going to the gym. I'm going for a walk. I plan on taking a walk. I know I'm going for a walk. I go on the walk. I burn the calories. I meant to do it. I did it. Mission accomplished, right? This is what people usually think about, okay, in terms of intentional physical exercise. I highly recommend getting a fitness tracker. For me personally, I tried Fitbit, didn't work for me. I tried Jawbone, which is another competitor, didn't work for me. I finally shelled out a few $100s to be able to get an Apple Watch. If you watch this channel, you'll end up seeing multiple times in videos, Siri, the little voice or whatever on the watch, will just like chime in on the videos and say things, so I always end up having to put it over here, even though it helps me track time when I've got it on my wrist. But it is tremendous. and it actually has apps on it, activity tracking apps that help you track all kinds of stuff. For me personally, I don't track steps. That helps some people in terms of how many steps have you walked in a given day. I like it because it'll let you select what exercise you're about to engage in, and then it will use your body's information, your heartbeat, so like your heart rate. You can put information in terms of your weight, your height, your sex, all kinds of different things, and that's going to help to really calculate the number of calories you're burning, not only overall, but specifically the number of calories that are burnt due to the activity. And that's a key thing, right? The total number of calories that you're burning are due to a lot of different factors. So if you can isolate the number of calories that are being burnt due to your individual activity that you're engaging in, that's going to help you out so much in getting a total calculation, helping you to track your daily caloric deficit. Okay, so that's my recommendation when it comes to number 1, which is intentional physical exercise. Number 2 is what the acronym is NEAT, and it stands for Non-Exercise Activity Thermogenesis. If you want to sound fancy at a party, say Non-Exercise Activity Thermogenesis. Either everybody's going to want to talk to you, or no one will ever want to talk to you again. You can give it a shot. It's like a fun party game, right? But the idea behind NEAT is that let's say that for example, I had to walk over here to the couch and sit down. I had to configure the cameras and this kind of stuff. I had to configure the lights. I had to walk down the stairs into my studio. I had to do all of these intentional things unintentional things, these unintentional activities to be able to just live my life. If I'm in the car, something is as tiny as literally, pressing my foot down on the accelerator and on the brake. If I go to the gym, I gotta walk into the gym. I gotta take my jacket off and put it into a locker. I gotta do all these things. To me, that's not intentional exercise. It is literally non-exercise activity, right? But it's still gonna result in thermogenesis in terms of my body, burning calories. And so that's something else to take into consideration. And a fitness tracker, again, is really going to help you figure out what is your average daily NEAT. And let's say you've got an active job. Let's say that, for example, you're a primary school teacher. You're standing up all day, and of course, standing up burns more calories than sitting down. You're walking around the school to take the kids to gym. You're walking around taking them to the cafeteria. Whatever it is, you're burning more calories than you might be thinking. And to be able to track those, again, is going to really help you out in terms of determining your daily caloric deficit to help you keep track of things. So that is number 2. Number 3 is something that's referred to as the thermic effect of food, or TEF. And what the TEF is basically what it means is that your body uses calories, it burns calories in order to process what it is that you consume, that you eat, right? Now remember that there's 3 big macronutrients, right? So we've got protein, we've got carbs, and we've got fat, okay? Now let's say that you eat 100 calories of each. All calories are not created equal, and here's what I mean by that, okay? If you eat 100 calories worth of protein, your body is going to use 20% of those, approximately 20-25% of those calories just to digest that 100 calories worth of protein. In other words, your body is only going to utilize through physical activity, be that intentional or unintentional, through your BMR, which is your basal metabolic rate. That's the 4th one we'll talk about in a second. It's going to be utilizing these calories, and if you don't, then it's going to get transferred into fat, right? I mean, that's how this works. But it's going to require 20-25% of those calories to be able to actually digest and kind of get through your body and this kind of stuff, all right? Now, compare that to carbs, where it's more around 10-15%. Okay, so if I eat 100 calories, not all 100 calories are going to be used by my body or stored in fat. Instead, it's only going to be 85 to 90 calories, right? That's going to actually be utilized. And finally, when it comes to fat, it's 5 to 10 calories. Now, I find it ironic that at the end of the day, what usually happens is that people think to themselves, well, a high protein, diet works because of such and such, it has nothing to do with calories. Now, something like a high protein diet can work for all kinds of reasons, but a couple of them are you'll end up having more of a caloric deficit than maybe you assumed if you're just counting calories on labels and all, because your body, right, I mean, compared to, let's say, a high fat diet, right, or let's say a high carb diet. Like for me, I don't do carbs, I do fat and I do protein, right? Fat and protein are great because it ends up making you feel more satiated for longer. And this, of course, depends on the kinds of carbs that you're eating, of course, right? Whole grains, always better. Brown as opposed to white, etc. Always better for you. However, it's something where, it's not just that you're eating protein per se, it has to do with that TEF, with that thermic effect. And it's the same thing if you believe in, well, I'm going to eat only a low-fat diet. Now keep in mind that eating fat doesn't make you fat necessarily, but of course things with high fat content tend to be more calorically dense, and of course more of those calories end up getting used in the body as opposed to being burnt up through digestion, through thermic effect of food. Now, keeping that in mind though, right, if you eat a low-fat diet, that means probably you're going to have increased carbs and increased protein, and of course those have a higher thermic effect of food, right? In other words, again, it has to do with calories in, calories out. And trust me, if you go onto YouTube, if you go on to blogs and whatever it is, you are going to find so much information about people advocating for every diet, or even saying that calories in, calories out is not necessarily true. And, much respect to everybody. People know way more than I do scientifically about this, but this is the data that I've seen, and so I really am a big believer in calories in and calories out. Finally, the fourth way we burn is through just our basal metabolic rate, which means this is the number of calories that, not taking into consideration any kind of, intentional or unintentional movements throughout the day, not taking into consideration the thermic effect of food, our body is naturally burning, okay? Just by being alive, right? Our heart's beating, the natural, factors having to do with sweat, just breathing in and out when we're sleeping, all these kinds of things, okay? All these are included in your basal metabolic rate. To figure out your basal metabolic rate, best thing to do, go to your doctor, okay? And sometimes a gym will also have the equipment, and they're basically going to have something that pinches your nose and have something that kind of looks like a long tube. You're going to be breathing exclusively through the tube for a number of minutes, and that is going to assist you in calculating to a precise degree your basal metabolic rate. And once you can figure out your basal metabolic rate, that kind of is going to serve as the foundation for how many calories you burn, right? Then we're going to add on top of that, using your fitness tracker, both your intentional and your unintentional exercise and movement, right? And then finally, on top of that, by tracking the macros in our food, we're going to include the thermic effect of food. And by including all four of those factors, we're going to get a really solid sense of, at the end of the day, how much we're burning, okay? Now, of course, burning is one side, right? But the other side, obviously, has to do with what we are consuming more than anything else, right? Now, there's certain things like proteins, for example, aren't going to affect your insulin as much, right, relative to certain kinds of carbohydrates. For me, my body's very sensitive, I've found, to different kinds of carbs, and just carbs in general. If I have too many grams of carbs, I try to keep myself under 100 grams a day. Sometimes, if I can get it, under 50 grams. I don't go into the whole keto phase where I'm under 25 grams a day. For me, that's not sustainable, right? And I try to choose healthy alternatives when I can. Instead of, pasta, I eat cauliflower pasta. Instead of, they have different kinds of bread or whatever. They're like low-carb alternative breads. These things, if I can do it or whatever, that's what I do. Yes, usually the products cost a little bit more, but at the same time, like, my health is very important to me, so I end up making that financial trade, that financial sacrifice to be able to kind of get this done. But what I find is that when I'm eating carbohydrates, my insulin jacks up, blood sugar goes up, and then because it can't stay there, because I'm not feeding it anymore, it slams down. And I all of a sudden get all of these symptoms. I start getting anxious. In some cases, that leads to me, feeling a higher propensity towards, just like getting irritated, right? Not angry per se, but I'm more irritable. I definitely have a harder time sleeping. I get fatigued. I get brain fog. I don't like to socialize all of a sudden. It's terrible. So if you want to avoid it, what do? you want to keep those levels high. And so because of that, you just eat more carbs. And it's this addictive self-reinforcing cycle that basically keeps you really jacked up. That's the only way to talk about it. And that ends up turning into an addictive cycle, right? An addictive psychological cycle, an addictive biological cycle. And it makes it so that you can have when I say some violent outcomes, what I mean by that is not violent in terms of like physical violence, but like if I have too many carbs before going to bed, y'all wake up at like 1 a.m. or 2 a.m. With my heart beating quickly and these sorts of things. It's this effect of the insulin just absolutely crashing, which is just, it's a terrible feeling, because it feels like you're out of control. So what I find is a higher protein diet for me works best. The most important thing is that the diet is sustainable for you, something where you're not restricting yourself in terms of certain things you enjoy. So for me, the thing is like, it would be restricting if I never had any kind of bread ever. But if I choose the healthy alternative of, let's say, a couple of slices of low-carb toast relative to, let's say, Wonder Bread, I can still have that olfactory, the scent, right? The tactile, right? The gustatory, so the taste. I can still have those experiences without it being something where I'm making unhealthy choices. I find that if you can simulate the same kind of gustatory experience by eating something that has a similar texture, feel to it, whatever, even if the prep is similar, I'm still putting the thing in the toaster and these things. All of these things are like tiny psychological tricks that can make it so your body is not going to desperately crave certain things to the point where you're going to fall off the rails. Because by calculating that caloric deficit, and I do really recommend, just on your phone, like I've got an iPhone, right? And what I do is that I just have a note, and the note is called diet, and anything that I eat, before I eat it, always before I eat it, I just write it down. And if I know how many calories are in it, fantastic, right? I can write that down. It's one of the reasons to avoid eating out. Always remember that restaurants' jobs are not to make you the healthiest version of yourself. It's to keep you coming back. They're for-profit businesses. And so because of that, they'll put all kinds of additives in there. They put all kinds of sugars. They put MSG. They put things in there that makes the food taste better. Right? It's not, something where it should be a surprise that usually food that you eat when you're eating out, tastes better, subjective term, right, than food that you may be preparing at home. That said, it's also very important to take into account that if you can prep that food, something that's similar in terms of your eating experience at home, right? That's I personally think the best. You can even spend $10 on Amazon and get a cheap little food scale. If you can measure it, you can manage it. I'm a huge believer in that. And you've got all of these apps like MyFitnessPal and these sorts of things that will help you calculate the number of calories in different portion sizes. And obviously, if you can weigh something, that's going to give you a lot more information than if you just say, one apple. Yeah, but that could be a huge apple or it could be a baby little apple. If you can weigh it and have an easy way to do it so that you're not spending 10 extra minutes, then you probably won't do it. To do this, if you can do it fast though, that's great. And then just track it for the day. And then obviously we're gonna have all that information about what we burnt, all that information about what we've consumed. And if you do eat out, my recommendation is go to the menu before, if you know where you're gonna eat, and just look at everything on the menu, decide what you're gonna eat before you even go, and then when you go there, be disciplined and order that. Period, okay? If you have to make an impulsive decision, especially if you're in a social context, the likelihood is significantly higher. You're gonna make a poor choice dietarily, okay? So a little bit of planning ahead. I'm talking about, 3 minutes of planning ahead can save you from basically going off the rails, and I do really recommend doing that. So those are my first two pieces of advice when it comes to the exercise piece and when it comes to the nutritional piece. So the final thing to talk about here has to do with the psychological element. So we've talked about the exercise, we've talked about the diet, but the psychological role that food can play in your life can be huge. Depending on, so for example, when I was a kid, I was a quite large child, and I was also one of the only ethnic minorities in my school. And because of that, I was definitely, picked on and these sorts of things. And food became a place of comfort. It became a respite, like an oasis for me, right? Because when you're eating, it makes you feel good, especially when you're eating unhealthy things. It makes you feel really good. You get this dopaminergic and serotonergic rush. It feels amazing, right, when you're eating. And of course, then though, when you're done with your food, that's gone. And then people usually get to the point where they're like, well, what am I going to have next? When am I going to get it? How am I going to get it? I got to drive somewhere, whatever it is. I got to order, carry out, or delivery, whatever it is. People get really concerned about these things, and all of a sudden your life starts to revolve around that only good, stable thing that you've got. Because it is stable, right? That it's going to be good. Right? Unless you do nothing but eat, let's say, muffins every day, after a while, it will stop tasting good. That impact will go away. But if you're like most people, where you have, a few favorite foods and these things, so for example, a lot of families, it'll be Pizza Friday, Taco Tuesday, whatever it is, they'll be on this cycle that they've created for themselves, this schedule they've created for themselves. But if you're not careful, that can be a very unhealthy cycle to follow. And if you do get to this point of addiction when it comes to food, especially if you're somebody like me, where it's refined carbohydrates and, cookies and cakes and chips and, all these sorts of things, it can be really hard to kind of get off of that. So, I made another video for this channel that I hope you'll check out. And if I remember, I'll either place a card up here or I'll put a link in the description. And it's all about alcohol and dating and attraction and these sorts of things. And the reason that I mention it now is that oftentimes, just like alcohol can serve a practical function when it comes to going out with the purpose of meeting someone, liquid courage, right? It makes you feel more confident, right? That's why you're using it like a tool. Food can become like a tool as well. And as we address the food element and the weight element by bringing it down through that caloric deficit, combining the information when it comes to diet and nutrition and exercise, at the same time, we need to increase whatever those weak muscles, not physical muscles, but mental muscles are, where food has been essentially playing that role for us. Be that, maybe we've got low self-esteem because we were bullied as kids. Maybe it's something where, we're somehow involved in an abusive relationship. This could mean having a boss who's very emotionally abusive. God forbid it means that you have a spouse or just someone directly like in your family who is being abusive towards you. I'm so sorry if that's happening, and I definitely, highly encourage you to be seeking help if that's the case. But regardless of what it is, right? Or maybe you're just really stressed at work and you don't have time to be able to go out with friends. You don't have a lot of social protective factors. Food is something that you can rely on. So what happens is that as you take that away, that crutch, which is what it is, if that is taken away and we're not replacing it with other protective factors, we're in trouble. Right? If we're not doing anything else, we're not building anything else at the same time, all we're doing is losing fat, not replacing it, we could see increases in things like anger, frustration, etc. So it's very important that we move both of these very slowly, right? But in the same direction. This is one of the big reasons I do agree with the general advice of not losing more than 1 to 2 pounds a week. But first of all, because that's like a caloric deficit of like 1,000 calories a day. There are approximately 3,500 calories in every pound of fat. Okay, and so because of that, 7 days in a week, 1,000 calories a day, that's a lot, by the way, of a deficit. That means that you go to the gym or whatever for an hour and you really work out hard and burn out 500 to 600 calories, then you're cutting, a minimum of like a fourth of your daily, like BMR, depending on how much you weigh and these things and your age, etc. That's a lot of a deficit. Losing more than that means you could go to extremes, and the more extreme you get, then the less, persistent you're going to be able to stay with this, consistent you're going to stay with this. It's just not a long-term strategy that's viable. So losing 1 to 2 pounds a week, and at the same time making those a minimum, 1% weekly changes. So maybe you're very, shy. That's okay. Maybe you feel really socially awkward. Usually we're way more judgmental of ourselves when it comes to socialization relative to how we actually function in social situations. We may think to ourselves, God, I'm so socially inept. I just don't know really how to interact with people. Then all of a sudden you go out and you interact with other people. People are really enjoying you. You're enjoying them. Yeah, it was hard to get to that venue, park, pay for the parking, go into the place, get dressed beforehand. Maybe there was a commute to get in. Maybe you don't know everyone there, and that's really anxiety provoking. But if you lean into the anxiety instead of avoiding it, at the end of the day, this can be a really wonderful situation for you. So I definitely, highly recommend, putting that effort in to be able to, let's say that you're using food as a reason not to go out. That weight being on you, you say, well, I can't go out. I can't because people are going to make fun of me. They're going to look at me weird, these things. As you start to lose the weight, if you're still not going out, you're going to be even more miserable, right? Because then you're going to find some other reason you're not going out, and that will be something that you end up thinking about all the time. So as that goes down, maybe you start going out once every 2 weeks. Once every 2 weeks for a happy hour, 1 hour. That's it. Maybe with somebody else that you know, like, and trust, right? And you meet a few new people. Maybe you sign up for a meetup, meetup.com, right? Whatever it is, you're Christian, you start going to a small group once a week. Whatever it is, religious function. Whatever it is, interacting with more people, you're going to find that your self-confidence and your self-efficacy, that feeling that you can do it, not only do you feel good enough, but you feel that you are effective in navigating this world socially, in navigating this world, obviously more, functionally in terms of your fitness. As you weigh less, you're going to be able to get around more easily, get outdoors, to be able to do outdoor activities more easily. You'll have so many more opportunities in your life if you were physically fit. And obviously, this is not to say that individuals who are not physically fit, that, to be able to pathologize obesity, to pathologize how people look. You're talking to a guy who for the majority of his life has been obese, right? Or at least significant, according to my BMI, obese. Not overweight, obese, according to the BMI, right? So it's one of these things where I really speak from a perspective of experience here about how it is that when you get these things under control, I do find that you are better able to navigate life. And again, this is not meant in any shaming way whatsoever. If I were to shame anybody, the likelihood is I'm pretty self-deprecating because I have very high self-esteem. And so bring on the self-deprecation, or the deprecation period, I guess. I don't care. It's one of these things where when you feel comfortable with yourself, it implicitly gives permission to everybody else around you to feel comfortable with themselves as well. We need to be bike reflectors, right, for other people, so that they see or whatever, that as our light shines, that ends up giving them permission to do so as well. There's a huge point or whatever. I've always been a guy, I do care about fashion, especially the older that I get, in terms of just knowing what to wear, etc. Even dumb things like being at the gym, right? Like Adidas, right? Also, you can't see the shoes, Adidas shoes. Adidas trousers. Everything is Adidas, right? Everything is color coordinated, right? Seems ridiculous. Took a while, but it's something I care about. It's a hobby. I'm proud of it. I enjoy it. Everybody's got their hobbies. That's one for me, especially because I put so much time into going to the gym. I want to look my best when I go to the gym. So when it comes to fashion, somebody once told me that there is nothing more fashionable than a physically fit body. And I truly believe that. I believe that the way that clothes fit you and knowing what fits your body type, because I'm an endomorphic guy, right? I'm not ectomorphic, right? I'm not mesomorphic, even though I'm more mesomorphic now than I've ever been in my life, right? I don't have the Dorito. I always joke and say I'm a trapezoid, right? Because I got a wider waist, right? So that's how it is. I once went to my doctor and I said, hey, I'm a 32. Maybe I can get down further. I got buddies, they're like a 28. And my doctor said, hey, you feel these? And he poked, and he's like, those are bones. It ain't going down anymore, right? So I'm like, all right, well, I guess I'm permanently a 32, so I'm going to be the best 32 that I can be. And that's the thing. I mean, again, you're talking to a guy who, lost 13 inches off his waist. I know the feeling of only being able to shop online and the shame that goes along with that, and the feeling of frustration about being treated like a piece of furniture by other people, and being nice to other people and them not being nice back, and going out to places and trying to make friends and other people not wanting to be your friend. I know what that feels like. It feels like garbage. And I wish that was not the case. And thank goodness for friends who you make and who stick it out with you all of those, years that maybe you're in that spot, right? They're huge blessings that we're given in this life. And I'm so grateful to those friends of mine who, through all the yo-yoing and these things up until now, have stayed such close friends with me. It truly is a blessing, and if you're watching this video and you're one of them, just know how grateful I am to you. In any case, regardless of what size you find yourself at now, I want you to remember just how perfectly loved you are by our Creator, by God. God loves us so much. It's like unbelievable. And the thing is that sometimes we have a hard time accepting ourselves. We may have so many experiences in life of other people not accepting us for how we look. But it is so true that as you experience God more deeply, as you read Scripture more deeply, that you have such a closer relationship with the one true source of just never-ending love and acceptance. And it can be so terrifying to experience that unconditional love that we don't think we deserve. But as we tap more deeply into it, it is so freeing. And if nothing else, if I can just encourage you, regardless of whether what your level of spirituality is, whether like I was an atheist for so many decades, and then came to faith. And so if you're watching this and you're an atheist, trust me, 100% I feel you, right? And so whatever that faith is for you, be it just straight up scientific literature, respect, right? Take a look, do a deep dive in terms of the scientific literature. You will find a sense of anchoring and peace knowing how your body biologically, scientifically functions through reading the scientific literature. It will give you a sense of stability and a real roadmap that you can follow to be able to get to whatever your desired level of physical fitness is. So, thank you so much, everybody, as always, for watching. Don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends in your congregation, subscribe to our social media accounts, and please do, again, if you haven't already, subscribe to our channel for more videos like this, hopefully bringing you some encouragement and some love and some positivity and some empathy into your days. In addition to that, if you are interested in one-on-one coaching and mentoring from me, it would be a blessing to be able to work with you. Please do feel free to check out my website below, where you can find out more about how to be able to book a session with me. All right, everybody, God bless you. Have a wonderful day, and I'm looking forward to seeing you again soon. Bye-bye. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you enjoyed that episode and you'd like to see more original content, then please do click on one of the links right here. I hope to see you in the next one.